ora tātou whānau, Paul Fenton here. Welcome to the Paul and Henry Show, episode number 15. Tēnā koe, Kane. We've got our leader here with us today. Pretty exciting. This is probably going to be our season finale, the last one for this year, and we're going to look to pitch them in a new series next year. So, Kane, welcome.
Yeah, kia ora korua. It's lovely to be on the Paul and Henry Show, the highest rating show in Wakakotahi.
Thank you to our viewers. Kane, we thought it'd be really good if you sort of shared with everyone your views on what it means to be a good regulator.
Yeah, there's a couple of things I think. Look, first and foremost, all regulators need to be really clear about what its regulatory purpose and objective is. And it's got to be really clear about all the tools it's got to be able to achieve that purpose, how and why you might want to use those tools. And thereafter, it's largely about making sure you've got really good processes and systems to allow people to exercise good regulatory discretion and judgment, and to continue to improve the way that you deliver regulatory services from an end-to-end perspective.
Yeah.
Well, so objective, tools, and then people and processes to use the tools. Yep. So what's your biggest focus at the moment on those three?
Well, actually, probably the biggest focus at the moment is probably all anchored in Tuaki Tumaya in the refresh.
Yep.
I've talked about that quite a bit over the last few months. But that's really important because there has been quite a bit of change within Wakakotahi. We've had Te Kapehu, and that was developed after Tuaki Tumaya. We've had the changes through from the NZTA Amendment Act, establishing the director. So there's quite a lot of things that have subtly shifted, but it's actually really important. And I think the important thing with Tuaki Tumaya 2 is that a large part of the focus has got to be on the future. The current one was very much a direct response to the Martin Jenkins review, which is why if you look at the 5 key shifts, you can track it back to the review. This next one's got to be all about focusing on the future, and it's also, I think, got to cover all parts of our regulatory functions, whether it's the access and entry licensing, right through to the compliance monitoring and enforcement bit.
And actually regulatory activities across the whole agency.
Yeah, across the whole agency, and also actually across the system. Because, this is when we talk about the partnership that we've got with the police, for example, and other agencies that regulate on the land transport system. One of the changes in the NZTA when the Director of Land Transport was established was that the Director's got a responsibility to monitor anyone who regulates on the land transport system. So it does allow us, it gives us a bit of a freedom to be able to look at actually how is the performance of the regulatory system to achieve those outcomes. And even if you think about deaths and serious injuries, one of the good things about Tuaki Tumaya as it currently stands is that we've already acknowledged that Wakakotahi has a role to play to contribute to a safer land transport system, but we're not the only ones who have a responsibility. The police have got a role, WorkSafe have currently got a role, all of the people who we appoint to check and certify vehicles have got a role, every single driver has got a role. So I think one of the important things here is that yes, we need to be really effective in what we do in the core operational areas, but actually we've got quite a nice sort of systems leadership responsibility as well.
Kane, you've answered that, I think, really neatly for me. So it's about being crystal clear about your purpose, and I think that is Tuaki Tumaya, isn't it? And understandably the refresh of that, being crystal clear about the tools that you have, and then having the right processes and systems in place to bring all those things to life and actually make it happen. We've talked about that at being a good regulator at a systems level. What does it mean for a person who works in a regulatory agency? So one of our frontline people here in Wakakotahi, you've been a Crown prosecutor, you've seen when things go good and bad. What does it mean? Any tips and tricks for our frontline people around what do you need to be doing and thinking about how should you be operating in a day-to-day sort of regulatory role?
Yeah, I think the most important thing in the day-to-day role, and whether that's whether you're in the contact centre, whether it's one of our compliance officers out with the CVST, for example, every single time you are making a decision, you are probably exercising a power, and so you've got to really understand why you might want to use the particular regulatory tool or lever that you've got. What are you trying to achieve if you use it? So if it's suspending someone's license, why? How is that helping advance or achieve our regulatory purpose or outcome? If you're really clear on that, then that I think is probably one of the most important things, because all of it comes down to judgment and discretion, and you can provide guidelines, which is what we've done with the compliance response framework, for example. And a large part of the value in that, of course, is that it does give people the ability to say, actually, why should I select this suspension tool over a warning, or why am I selecting that tool over potentially revoking someone's license? So that the why bit is probably the most important thing, and that's where the alignment back to the purpose is really important.
I think that's a really good point, and we've had a few episodes where we've talked about the importance of doing that well, and then writing it down and recording it.
Yeah. I've If I think about my litigation days, whether that's me prosecuting or defending judicial review decisions, or actually even doing work for defendants who were prosecuted by agencies, largely work for insurers, the one thing that always trips up regulators, and it's normally your compliance officers, is not having well documented information, evidence, not being really clear around how you've been able to justify the decisions that you've made. And for the most part, you're not put to the test, because not everyone will challenge you legally.
Yes.
And of those people who challenge you legally, few will actually go all the way through to a trial or a defended hearing. But often when they do, you then start to expose some of the flaws in an audit or an investigation. Interestingly, I ran a week-long litigation skills session for people in Environment Southland. And these were enforcement officers who carried out enforcement activities under the Resource Management Act. And so we got them to basically build up a complete case file, and then we got them to pull together their briefs of evidence, got them into the local court with a few of us lawyers. One of us led them through their evidence, and then they were cross-examined. And it was a lot of fun for us. But we ripped them apart. And the idea of that was for them to be able to go, oh my God, thank God this isn't actually in a real court life situation. Because if it was, it would have been, cases would have been thrown out. And it would have been thrown out because the compliance officer hadn't done their job in documenting all of the evidence, or having an evidential chain. And when you've got a break in that chain, you lose evidence. And when you lose evidence, you start to weaken the case. So that's one of the fundamental hygiene aspects of it. Collect evidence, store it, make sure that when you're making decisions, you've got the evidential foundation to do it, which is also one of the challenges for a lot of compliance officers is this person is not meeting the standard. Which standard? Why are they not meeting the standard? Show me the evidence. And then you realise that actually there's not the documented evidence there. Their instincts are probably right, but when you say, show me the tangible evidence to prove this assertion, that's when it often starts to fall apart.
So that's sort of focusing on the evidence. The other thing I would emphasise with preparing for litigation is the why, what you were saying earlier. So I think our most common reason we end up in court is a regulatory appeal. So we revoke someone's licence, they have a right to appeal to the district court. Often it's their whole livelihood at stake, so they'll have a go in the district court. And it's being able to explain that, they weren't meeting standards, they were non-compliant, but why did we reach for that tool? What were we hoping to achieve, as you say? And ideally, preparing for court is not the first time that we tackle that question and piece it together. I mean, it is a chance to strengthen the argument and put a bit more care into it because it's under that more focus, but it should be there in the reasoning, in the documentation, right?
It makes it a lot easier when you are put to the test if you've got it there. Yeah, and the other thing too is, I mean, my observation, certainly as a litigator, is that there's huge volumes at a district court level and often, judges, need to kind of make, good sound decisions and judgments. When you get into the High Court or the Court of Appeal, courts have often got the time to properly consider legal argument. And this is where the law starts to move into the policy area, which is, what's the policy rationale for waka kotahi having these statutory tools and powers? And more often than not, when it comes down to decisions that we make, which have a massive impact on people and their livelihoods, there is an element here where it also comes down to a question of fairness. And it's fairness in process, and it's fairness in how we've been able to reach the decision that we have.
So, Kane, all of this really just links back to that earlier conversation we were having about being crystal clear about, as a regulator, what are we here to do? What are we trying to achieve? What's our purpose? I like that you've brought up the fairness thing, because that is a big, how we sort of position ourselves and how we behave as a regulator, big part of Tuaki Te Mai, and one that we think we need to get right 100% all the time, don't we? So it's our firm and fair. I hope that continues through phase 2 of Tuaki Te Mai.
Yeah, look, it'll definitely continue through, because you're right. And it's a really tough conundrum for regulators. When do you know when to be more on the fair side of the equation, and when do you be on the firm side of the equation? You'll have things which are clearly, let's work with them, because there's a really good chance that they will comply if they know what the standards are. You've got people who are just recidivist, non-compliant people, and you've got to be really firm. But there is quite a big grey in the middle, and that's the bit which requires a lot of judgment and discretion. Yeah. But I mean, the good thing is that I think we've got really good support. I mean, we've got good managers, senior managers. We've got really good legal teams. So the advice and support is there. If people are able to identify the stuff that's in that grey area. So we've got good processes in place. I remember when I first came on board, we had the decision-making group, which the mere reference to that might send shudders down some people's spines. But, there were cases where you had the room completely divided, 50-50. Do you revoke, do you not? Very strong reasons why we should, very strong reasons why we shouldn't. And you've got very smart, clever people looking at this from different angles, compliance officers, managers, lawyers, myself, comms people, all with completely, two different views, but all very strongly believing that their view was the right one.
And importantly, those views are all, managers and people making those decisions are just looking at the evidence that's been put in front of them. Hence the importance of the people that are collecting that at the front line to make sure it's all documented, recorded well, it's complete, so the decision is being made across, with all of the information that's needed to make the decision, not a selection of evidence, which I've seen before.
Yeah, because it is something where, you just, when you make these things, the first thing you need to do is just collect the evidence, and the evidence will tell you what it tells you. We shouldn't necessarily be doing these things already kind of with a view in mind of what outcome we want to achieve. Collect the evidence first, assess it, analyse it. There's often quite a nice method of, does the evidence establish or not whether someone has breached or failed to comply with the standard? That's the first bit. Then once you've got over that hurdle, it's, okay, given that we've now got the evidence to show that this person hasn't met the standard, what is our response going to be? What do we think the right thing to do? What's the proportionate response? That's where the compliance response framework starts to kick in, because that's about, how do we exercise the judgment? We know that we can, but what do we think is the firm and fair thing to do in this instance?
Solid advice, thank you. Should we talk about the director? Role of the director? I don't want to put you on the spot, but I think it might be you. Role of the director, it's a new thing. Other transport agencies have had this for a long time. Waka Kotahi hasn't. Do you want to give everyone just the sort of high level around how it's come about and the purpose and the role of the director?
Yeah, so the Director of Land Transport role came about as one of the policy responses to the Martin Jenkins review. One of the areas of criticism was that Waka Kotahi didn't have the right level of governance and accountability for the leadership of regulatory functions and activities. One of the at least underlying kind of assumptions around that was that the agency's got quite a broad set of responsibilities and functions. It does planning, investment in the infrastructure, very, very strong commercial element, and billions of dollars that we invest to build roads, highways, multimodal transport, and then have to invest in it, whether us directly or through councils. And then you've got the regulatory functions on the other hand. And rightly or wrongly, the regulatory functions were very much the poor cousin. And so one of the policy responses was to have a director of land transport with very clear statutory accountabilities for the regulatory functions of Waka Kotahi. What it also does is it gives the director statutorily independent functions as well. And that's largely around a lot of the operational things around entry control, compliance monitoring and enforcement. So it's really intended to safeguard any future risk that the regulatory function might not have the same, or might not have the level of focus that it needs to at that board executive.
There's a big monitoring role there for the director, isn't there, to make sure the system's working safely and as it should.
Yep. Yeah, there's two that broadly, because there's a lot in the list of things that the director has to do. But if I was to break it down, it largely boils down to two main things. One is having all the statutory powers to do all the entry control, licensing, compliance monitoring. That's the stuff that we do, today, and we're continuing to improve how we operate there. The second, which is new, is all of the monitoring responsibilities that the director has, and I talked about one a bit earlier, which is monitoring others who regulate in the land transport system, monitoring against the land transport system's performance with things like safety and security, sustainability. So there's lots of new stuff in there. We had a really good session with the board because all of this stuff is happening in the context of the overall story of Te Waki Tumaia, which is how do we go from independent reviews to being a real world regulator, knowing that that's going to take time to get there. So for me, I think I look at the director role thinking it's definitely got an important leadership role and responsibility, but you've got this 95% of this big regulatory machine that needs to continue to operate and serve New Zealanders now. And so, for me, the challenge is actually how do we make sure that we can continue to evolve the director role, but not lose sight of the fact that actually the biggest gains that we're going to have if we're going to improve safety, improve access, is sitting in those operational areas, because we know that there's huge improvements that we can make, irrespective of some of these new responsibilities that the director has.
Brilliant, thank you, Henry.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and the other interesting thing with the director, of course, is that it sits within the agency, which retains those other functions, investment and construction functions. And the challenge is to have a clear focus and accountability on core regulatory work and independence when that's needed, like making prosecution decisions, but still work within and across this big agency, right? And you talked about our regulatory tools. And a lot of, I'm hearing around the place, is some of those policy tools and other levers we have in the system to change behaviour, which you could call regulatory, even though they're not the sort of tools where you end up in court, like licensing tools. So that's another big challenge for the director, isn't it? Is to work within and across this big portfolio agency.
Yeah. There's clarity of accountabilities for the regulatory responsibilities, but also it's how do you kind of leverage the power of the whole? Because I think one of the things with Te Kapehu and the outcomes measures and the framework, a lot of things that we do on the regulatory side and in the SHE group and in transport services, there's a focus on safety. So we're all trying to achieve the same thing. It's actually, and how do we kind of work together on the multiple levers that we've got, whether that's transport levers, transport services leaders designing safer roads, or our levers, which is using our regulatory levers to make sure that commercial operators are meeting the standards and therefore driving safety on the road. So that's the challenge, I think, is being clear about those accountabilities, which keeps everyone safe, but also recognising that we're all interested in safety, we're all interested in sustainability, we're all interested in how we can better serve New Zealanders. It's how do we kind of work in a coordinated way to pull all of the levers that we've got to achieve those outcomes.
Sounds easy.
All I can say is, if it was easy, I wouldn't be here, and Paul probably wouldn't have joined either. I mean, look, it's conceptually, I think when you kind of aggregate it up to what are we really trying to achieve here, there is a nice simplicity to it. Yes. But it is actually really complex because I think I come back to what I said before, which is we are working in a really complex system and we don't control it. And so our ability to kind of influence across the organisation, our ability to influence across the sector, even our ability to be able to influence, at a ministerial policy level, largely comes down to how effective are we in truly developing collaborative relationships, however you might describe them, and are we doing things where we can build people's trust and confidence in us? Those are the two things that's really going to unlock that. But I mean, that's where the complexity comes, is that when you realise that I've got the power to do this, but that's one very small slither of how you can affect change across the whole system. It's quite sobering, but that's what makes it complex, I think. And fun,
and important, right? It's important work.
Any final words, Kane?
Oh no, look, other than to say that, well, two things really. One, it's a pleasure to be on the season finale. The second thing is, I think, just to assure the viewers that even though you're going to be heading across to civil aviation, you're still going to be back for to run the Paul and Henry shows for season 2. So
Henry hasn't signed the deal yet, but I reckon a couple of beers and I'll have him across the line.
Maybe a Paul show. But actually, so no, I'm pleased that, Paul, that you're coming back to keep the show rolling, because I know that that this show is very popular. Dare I say, probably more popular than some of Nicole's posts, and probably more popular than some of mine. So there you go. But the other thing too, I just wanted to say is that, look, I know that everyone's working really hard. We're continuing to, to continue to make sort of steps towards improving how we regulate, being more efficient, giving people the right tools, etc. When you put it in the context of where we've come from with those reviews, and it was really, really tough and challenging times, we know that we've made improvements, but we also know that we've got a lot more that we need to do. And it's, to your point, Henry, there's a simplicity at one level, but there's a complexity when you start to lift the hood. So it will take us time to get there, but I'm confident with the focus at the board level and the executive level, we're very much focused on continuing to improve how we operate. So I do want to thank everyone across, not just Te Ropu Waituri, but also across our Waka Kotahi who have supported us, including our wonderful legal team, for sort of taking us on what's been a really wicked journey so far.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on the show. It's great to have you here. We'll definitely get you back for season 2. I probably need to put it in your calendar now. I think it's taken me 15 episodes to get you here. You're a very busy man. So thank you so much. Anything else from you, Henry, before we wrap up?
No, thanks, Kane. That was really good. Yeah.
Solid stuff. Ka kite no whanau. Take care.
Ka kite.
We'll see you next year.